Apparently, asking one adult man to stop using the pharmacy counter like a personal office desk is now harassment. Which is interesting, because I thought the pharmacy line was for people picking up prescriptions, not for one man to host a full administrative retreat next to the blood pressure machine. I was at the pharmacy on a Tuesday afternoon, which is already a fragile time for civilization. The lights were too bright, everyone looked tired, half the line was holding phones, the other half was holding paper bags, and all of us were holding the last available scraps of patience. I was not there for drama. I was not there to supervise strangers. I was there to pick up a simple refill, buy allergy tablets, and go home before the frozen chicken in my trunk developed opinions. The pharmacy area was small. One counter, two registers, though only one was open. A little sign said, "Please have your ID and insurance card ready." Another sign near the side window said, "Additional questions may be handled at consultation." Very reasonable, very civilized, very clearly written for people who understand that lines are not emotional concepts. They are physical arrangements. There were 5 people ahead of me when I arrived. That was fine. I can wait. I am not unreasonable. I understand pharmacies involve names, birth dates, insurance cards, discount codes, and that mysterious printer that always sounds like it is fighting for its life. The line moved slowly, but it moved. A woman picked up a prescription and left. An older gentleman asked one question, got his answer, and stepped aside. A college student paid, shoved the little white bag into his hoodie pocket, and vanished with the urgency of someone whose parking meter was already disappointed in him. Then, by the time only one person was ahead of me, we reached him. The man at the counter. At first, nothing seemed unusual. He gave his name, he answered the standard questions. The cashier rang him up, he paid. The small white pharmacy bag appeared, the receipt printed. The cashier smiled and said, "You're all set." Beautiful phrase, clear phrase. A phrase that in most functioning environments means the transaction has ended and the next person may approach. The man nodded. Then he stayed there. He stood directly in front of the only open register with the pharmacy bag in one hand, his phone in the other, and the receipt held up like it contained instructions for landing a plane. At first, I said nothing that matters. People love to act like I wake up in the morning and go looking for public inefficiency. I do not. Public inefficiency finds me repeatedly, usually under fluorescent lighting, so I waited. The cashier glanced at the woman ahead of me. The woman took one small, hopeful step forward. The man did not move. He looked at his receipt, then at his phone, then back at the receipt, then at the little pharmacy bag, as if the bag might clarify its own pricing structure. If you enjoy stories about simple errands becoming procedural emergencies, subscribe. Because apparently step away from the counter after you are done is now an advanced social theory. The cashier said politely, "Sir, I can help the next guest while you check that." That should have solved it. It did not, he said. "Hold on, I might have another question." Might, that word did a lot of work. He might have another question. He might also remember a coupon from 2018, or decide to compare every line item against his personal memory of last month. But the rest of us were standing there with actual completed intentions. The woman in front of me shifted her purse. Someone behind me sighed quietly, but with history. The man started tapping on his phone. Not fast tapping, not purposeful tapping, wandering tapping, the kind of tapping where you can tell someone has entered a menu, regretted it, and blamed the phone for existing. Then he placed the pharmacy bag back on the counter and said, "Actually, can you explain why this total is different from last time?" Now, that is a valid question. I'm not anti-question. Ask questions, understand your receipt, protect your budget, especially at a pharmacy. I fully support financial literacy when it occurs in the correct physical location. The cashier explained that prices can vary depending on insurance processing and discounts. Normal explanation. Calm voice. Good posture. Professional survival. The man nodded slowly. Then he said, "Okay, but last month." And that is when the line changed. Not physically, emotionally, because everyone recognized we were no longer waiting for a pickup. We were trapped inside one man's receipt investigation. The woman in front of me gave him a polite look. He did not notice. She gave the cashier a polite look. The cashier noticed. The cashier knew. Everyone knew. Even the blood pressure machine knew. I waited another moment because I'm fair. I believe in giving people space to realize they have become the problem. Then the woman in front of me said, "Excuse me, are you still being helped?" He turned slowly and said, "Yes." The cashier's face did something very small, the kind of expression retail employees make when their soul briefly asks to leave the building. The woman said, "Oh, it just seemed like you were checking your phone." He said, "I have questions, plural, a dangerous word." At that point, I leaned slightly forward and said in a calm voice, "Maybe you could step to the side while you look that up, so the line can keep moving." That was the sentence. Not leave, not nobody cares about your receipt, not sir, this is not your financial headquarters. I simply suggested that the questions occur a few feet to the left, where the actual consultation window was already waiting with its little sign and everything. He looked at me like I had unplugged a machine keeping him alive. He said, "I'm at the counter." "Yes, that was the issue." I said, "Right, but you're not actively checking out." He said, "I was here first." There it was, the ancient cry of people who believe arrival time grants permanent property rights. I said, "You were helped first. That part happened. Was that sharper than necessary?" Maybe, but it was also a summary. The woman in front of me looked down quickly, which I interpreted as silent support. The man behind me coughed into his fist, also support. I do not invent consensus, I notice patterns. The man said, "People can wait. Tell me in the comments, because I genuinely want to understand why do some people think people can wait is an argument when the whole point is that people are already waiting?" I said, "We are waiting. That's why the counter needs to move." The cashier quietly said, "Sir, I can answer additional questions right over here after I help the next person." Beautiful, professional, efficient, a sentence with structure. He did not like that. He said, "So now I'm being rushed?" Nobody had rushed him. Time itself had gently suggested he relocate. The woman in front of me said, "I just need to pick up." The man said, "So do I." I looked at the pharmacy bag already in his hand. I said, "You did." That was not my softest moment. But it was accurate. He held up the receipt and said, "I'm trying to understand my bill." I said, on the side, 2 words, clear, practical, apparently inflammatory. He looked at me and said, "People are so impatient." Now, I do understand pharmacies can be stressful. Medication can be confusing. Bills can surprise people. That is exactly why the side window exists. It is not decorative. It is a place where questions go, so the line does not become a hostage situation. If you think a completed transaction should end with stepping away from the register, hit the like button, because apparently that belief now requires public courage. The cashier gestured gently toward the consultation window and said, "I can help you there." The man turned toward it, looked at it, then looked back at the rest of us like the consultation window was a punishment island. He said, "I shouldn't have to move." The older woman behind me muttered, "Good grief," not loudly, not officially, but spiritually it carried. The man heard it. He said, "Everyone's got something to say today." That was inaccurate. Most of us had been remarkably restrained. If anything today had featured not enough saying, then he did something truly baffling. He stepped halfway away from the counter, then left his shopping basket on the floor directly in front of the register. His basket, a small plastic store basket filled with vitamins, a magazine, and what appeared to be 3 different brands of antacids, now acting as a placeholder for his body. So the woman in front of me still could not step up properly. The cashier still had to lean around it. The man had not moved. He had outsourced his obstruction to an object. I looked at the basket. I looked at him. I said, "Your basket is still blocking the counter." He said, "It's not bothering anyone." The woman in front of me said very quietly, "It is beautiful moment. Public honesty, rare and refreshing, like finding a working pen at a bank." The man rolled his eyes and dragged the basket 1 foot to the side with his shoe, not picked it up, not moved it properly, dragged it with his shoe like it was a reluctant pet. The woman stepped forward at last. The cashier helped her in under 30 seconds. 30 seconds. That is what the entire system had been waiting for. Not a miracle, not a policy summit. 30 seconds of counter access. Then it was my turn. I stepped up, gave my name, confirmed the routine information, paid, and received my little pharmacy bag. Quick, civilized, almost inspiring. The man was still at the side window, now scrolling his phone while the pharmacist explained something patiently. As I stepped away, he said, "Some people think the world revolves around them." I turned before I could stop myself. "Growth is a journey, not a straight line," I said. "Some people think the line revolves around their receipt." The cashier made the smallest possible noise. Not a laugh, not officially, but not nothing. I left with my refill and allergy tablets, feeling that I had contributed in a modest way to the restoration of pharmacy flow. I thought that was the end. It was not the end. That evening, my sister sent me a screenshot from a local group. Of course she did. Apparently, no public interaction can remain local to the location where it happened. By sunset, everything becomes a paragraph. The post said, "To the woman at the pharmacy who harassed a man for asking questions about his medication, I hope you learned compassion. Not everyone can move as fast as you." Harassed. A man asking questions. That is not what happened. He could ask questions. He could ask questions all day. He could write a memoir of questions. I simply suggested that the questions happen 2 feet to the left in the place specifically designed for additional questions. The comments were predictable. People have no patience. Pharmacies are stressful. Mind your business. One person wrote, "This is why I use delivery." Honestly, fair. My sister texted, "Please tell me this one wasn't you." I said, "Define harassed." She said, "Did you argue at a pharmacy?" I said, "I advocated for counter mobility." My husband heard that from the living room and said, "That is not a normal phrase." I said, "It is, if you understand flow." He said, "I don't want to understand pharmacy flow." A week later, I went back to the same store. Not to investigate, I needed toothpaste. Dental health does not pause for misinformation. And there beside the pharmacy register was a new sign. "Please step aside after checkout so we may assist the next customer." Now, am I claiming they printed that sign because of me? No. I'm not claiming direct institutional influence. I'm simply observing that after one counter-related incident, the pharmacy developed a written position on post-transaction lingering that is called impact. So no, I do not regret saying something. I regret that basic line movement now requires courage. I regret that "I was here first" has apparently become a claim to permanent counter-residency. And I regret that a plastic basket of antacids briefly had more authority than the people waiting to pick up medication. Next time, I'll tell you what happened when a woman at the school bake sale tried to reserve 6 cupcakes with a napkin while she went to check with her husband. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because if I have to keep explaining the difference between being helped and blocking access, we might as well all learn from it together. I was not harassing anyone. I was not rushing a medical conversation. I was protecting a pharmacy counter from becoming one man's administrative headquarters. My side of the story, obviously,